Cooling and heating consume a lot of power. What is the best way to create indoor comfort and save energy? The question of indoor comfort often leads to a discussion on equipment. We think about climate control systems such as air conditioners and heaters, what to buy, how to assemble, how to manage fluctuating demand. But what if the answer was only partly about mechanical solutions? Can we create comfort indoors with little or no energy? Welcome to EcoGradia, where we meet experts and practitioners at the front lines of sustainable architecture and urbanism. My name is Nirmal Krishnani. I'm a sustainable design strategist, author, and educator based in Singapore. My guest today is Wolfgang Kessling, a partner at Transsolar Energy Technique in Munich, Germany, one of the world's leading experts on climate-friendly design and adaptive comfort. If you ask Wolfgang which air conditioner to buy, he will quickly stop you. The smarter question, he says, is what conditions make me comfortable? This bespoke approach seems labor-intensive in an industry where most project teams will start by picking equipment. I have worked with Wolfgang on several projects. He sees energy flows where others see technology. Now, this may be because Wolfgang is not a building engineer, he's a physicist. His low-tech, low-energy approach can take a little longer to figure out, but it also leads to more interesting and cost-effective solutions. In this interview, Wolfgang deconstructs thermal comfort, which variables affect our perception, how we can create new combinations of the same variables at a lower energy cost for a better human experience. If you're unfamiliar with the projects discussed or would like to know more about some of the ideas mentioned in this interview, go to ecogradia.com to view notes, pictures, and links that we have compiled on the episode page. This first season of EcoGradia is sponsored by the Holcim Foundation for Sustainable Construction. The foundation was created in 2003 to empower a community of future makers through the transfer of ideas, knowledge, and real-world solutions. Next year, we'll see the start of a new cycle of the Holcim Awards, which is the most significant prize for sustainable construction in the world today. Go to holcimfoundation.org to find out more. Wolfgang, thank you for coming on today. You were at one time training to be a nuclear physicist. So what changed your mind?
I studied physics at the beginning of my career, and I was fascinated with energy when Chernobyl happened in the 80s, 86, and that made me rethink what I want to do with my life and in which field of expertise I want to work. But at the same time, I was in a student initiative developing solar collectors, same semester. And we developed solar collectors full of energy, making collectors for warm water, out of the hands, out of the laboratory. We're thinking we do great things, and we've been gluing black things on piece of wood and making glass on top of that. So we created our first solar collector. We switched it on, and 5 minutes later, it was just destroyed. It was just broken. Wow. I think that was key for me. That was key to understand, hey, I want to do something good, and I need to do it professional. Solar and nuclear energy actually is something very good if it's the safe 8 minutes away from us, if it's happening on the sun. So bringing both together, I went to Munich studying solar physics and started working then for 10 years in research about how to use solar energy for the benefit of creating energy in the context of what people need, thermal energy and electric energy.
You ended up in a discipline called climate engineering. Now, that's an unusual phrase. What is that? What does that specifically mean in the context of buildings?
Yes, you are right. We ended up in something what we call climate engineering, and that is linked to what I just said of the solar energy path. All of my partners, all of the founders of Transsolar went through the same thing. We have been experts in thinking about technology, thinking about how to bring solar technology into the world of buildings. And what we learned is basically when we have been talking to clients, we've been talking in research projects, hey, it's way better to think about what is the energy used for. So we went through a process learning that people are not interested in energy, but interested in a good climate. And that formed the basis of doing what we do at Transsolar today, climate engineering, basically describing in an artificial word that we think about how to create environments in climatic, comfort, in other environmental terms, which are the objective for people, what people need. That is probably quickly describing what climate engineering is, but it's linked back to where we came from.
So you mentioned Transsolar. This is the company, the firm where you are now a partner, Transsolar Klima Engineering. Tell us a little bit about this. So when was it set up? How big is it now?
Transsolar was set up 30 years ago. In 2 weeks from now, we celebrate our 30th birthday with a big party, bringing everybody together in Germany out of our different offices. We are a small company, very specialized. To frame it a little bit, probably 80 persons with offices in New York, Stuttgart in Germany, Munich in south part of Germany, and offices in Paris and a starting office in Canada. 80 people, 80 engineers working at Transsolar with a background of engineers. So we are predominating engineers. We have some architects and supporting teams around the world with what you just mentioned, climate engineering, basically developing projects, buildings, master plans in a mindset which is anchored to our bigger idea, what we want to do, creating comfortable spaces for people and reducing energy and technology for this.
Let's start with a fundamental question about building performance. Now, this is central to the idea of buildings doing better, right? So the prevailing thinking on performance is efficiency of equipment and systems. And so many project teams will start by asking, what is the most efficient chiller I can buy? What are the best light systems or sensors or controls? What is your view of this approach as a starting point?
That's a great question, because we have a very different view on how to introduce our talents into projects. We look on people. We start with the people. We put a huge focus on what are the needs of people and how can we achieve this with less. And that's our starting point. And technology then follows, techniques then just follow this design thinking. Put people first, figure out what they need, what kind of comfort, environmental conditions would be healthy, inspiring, just creating great places, and then figure out what is the appropriate technology and technique for the lifestyle, the local lifestyle, and the local conditions, the local resources, the local climate.
So equipment is not the starting point. It's the back end of this. It's beginning with a question about what constitutes a good quality of environment, and then looking at what, whether it's technique, meaning passive strategies, or it's technology, what can get us there at the lowest cost in terms of energy.
I never have an idea what kind of technology I bring into a project. I always look on what is the things what we need first. And then we figure out, for this project, this would be the better assembly of passive and active systems serving the purpose better. So it's very, I often say when I show projects, please don't take these projects as an example for just see the process behind where we started and where we ended as something which we probably would apply and use for your project. But don't see the technology as something. I'm not selling technology.
In fact, one of the terms that comes up very often when you look at the Transsolar website is this idea of low energy and low tech. That's a really interesting combination of words. And it's used to describe an approach that basically minimizes reliance on electromechanical systems while delivering indoor comfort. So let's make this tangible. Let's take a look at an ongoing project as an example of this approach. One of my favorite projects that you work on is the Brak University campus, which is situated in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So the climate here is hot and humid. Bangladesh is a relatively poor country with limited resources. And the architecture of the building by Boha Architects in Singapore, it's a 13-story building. It's consisting of several narrow depth teaching blocks that are arranged in parallel. And the gaps between these blocks, they draw in air and cool the building passively. What's interesting in terms of your contribution is that 75% of the enclosed spaces are designed with a hybrid ventilation system that's proposed by you, which combines tempered air with ceiling fans. Now, as a result of all of these things, the architecture and the systems, the total energy demand is reduced by 40% compared to conventional building. And 25% of this is generated by solar PV on the roof. Now, let's walk through this point that you make about process, because earlier you said it's not about the technology, it's about the process, how you go from here to there. That is the real lesson. So what was the process of the BRAC campus? What was your starting point?
School of Arts in Singapore was a kind of a prototype project which was forming the base for the development of the idea in Bangladesh. Same architects, Woha architects from Singapore, have been developing the idea to transform this kind of school, which is standing on legs, bringing up the social spaces, the school spaces from the ground to a higher height, because of many reasons, master plan reasons, accessibility, climate reasons, so many things. So typical for Transsolar was understanding, can we transform the element of creating comfort in good spaces from the idea of this existing buildings? Can we bring that to BRAC? And what are the challenges in Dakar? What is the local climate different? And that was a starting point. And then there was an interesting element which probably links to your question of process. Typically, clients create a brief. We want this. We want a school. We want a building which has this quality. And we've been looking on this, and then we ask ourselves a question. Is that what the words they put on paper and they describe to us, is that what they really need? And we had the very nice chance to visit Dakar, to visit with a client the existing school buildings, visit studios of architects, and then we figured out they have been saying, this is a space we like to have. And we as climate engineers, looking with our professional climate engineering eyes, understood, okay, this is the conditions which are excellent and they want to have. But the wording is different. This is not air-conditioned space. This is a space which has created its quality by many other environmental parameters, which we understood. This was so essential to us to learn how to transform the idea from Singapore to Dakar and to create an excellent environment in terms of natural ventilation and thermal comfort, serving the client, which is a part of the process which is essential to us.
What was the thing that they liked? I mean, you say that they introduced you to a studio. Can you elaborate on that? What was the thing that they were not saying that they liked?
Basically, what happens, Nirmal, is we have been walking through this through their university. We have been working through the places they showed to us and said, hey, these are the studio spaces and they look like this and they perform like that. And we have been looking, okay, what are the people doing there? What are they wearing? How is fresh air introduced? What are the thermal conditions? We had these measurements instruments with us. We don't expose them. We are not running around like huge scientists scaring our clients. We just have the instruments with us and say, hey, look, this is 29 degrees, but they have the ceiling fan and they combine it with this fresh air. So let's make sense of what they have, they like, they want to have, and recreate these thermal conditions. Starting point is understanding the thermal conditions, understanding the use of the space, feeling safe that I understand them with my team, and then transforming that and talking to Woha architects, to the designer and the client, and get them on board and saying, hey, let's change. Let's do not follow your simple AC definition. We want spaces which have AC, and replace that definition with, let's create places which are comfortable.
So when you say AC, they were actually assuming that they wanted air conditioning throughout in the beginning. And right. This was a conversation that you had to have with them.
Right. It was these typical client brief information, AC, air conditioning, 24 degrees. Simple definitions, which often express the starting point for a very fruitful discussion on, is that what you need?
what were the barriers to getting to this point? I mean, it going from assumptions that I need AC everywhere, air conditioning everywhere, to one in which you begin to accept different modes of comfort that combine ceiling fans and natural ventilation. This must have been a challenging thing. But apart from this, what other barriers and obstacles and challenges did you face in this conversation that you were having with the clients?
The question you just make, Nirmal, is very often in my mind, and I'm often thinking about what does it make so difficult to convince teams, and what is in my mind and what I don't get my head around is actually people are human sensors. We have a lot of senses. We sense our thermal environment quite sensitive. We sense humidity. We sense air temperature. We sense radiant temperature. We sense our environment, air movement all around us. And we spend a lot of senses to equilibrate our temperature and our thermal comfort in this. Having said that, we know very, very little and we understand very, very little about what are environments in which we feel comfortable. And this very, very little sometimes is reduced to so little information like 24 degrees Celsius is what I want. Air temperature. So with this huge, interesting, complex human being a human sensor, full of sensors, we reduce at the end what we designed for basically to a number which is nothing else than a set point of a machine. And this is a huge gap. And that huge gap is basically where, when we come into projects, we need to close that gap, to talk about how can we reduce, how can we create something where you feel with all your senses well, but it's not linked to the set point of an air conditioning machine.
I like the point you make about the human body being like a set of sensors, and air temperature is only one of the things that we sense, right? What else do we sense that begins to interact in the perception of comfort? So the perception of comfort is a complex thing. It's not pure air temperature. There are many things interplaying with each other. Can you just give me a sort of an overview of what that complexity of the human body is like?
Let me rewind that and frame that into what science has been developing in the last century. And I would like to mention Olaf Fanger, a great scientist working on human comfort, on thermal comfort. And he was probably the first who figured out that the energy balance of a human body is basically an energy balance. I'm a physicist. I'm a scientist. I love energy balances. You can write them down. Yeah, you can put your ingredients, your parameters, and it's an equation. So you figure out, and that's the great thing what Fanger did. He has put an equation quite complex onto the table saying this describes the energy balance of a human body. And he, at that time, that was the early 70s in the last century, he figured out the predominating parameters are air temperature, the humidity of the air, the movement of the air, but he also introduced mean radiant temperature. So that's the environment radiating back to my body and my body radiating back to the environment, which is 50% of what I perceive. It's a lot. So he figured out that these four parameters, in combination with personal parameters, which is what is my activity, what I'm wearing, that if you put these 6 parameters sound so scientific, but if you consider these 6 elements of the environment, you can describe comfort. Putting that into context of what we typically discuss, let me say again, these 24 degrees, we already see we would miss a lot of opportunities if we would not look on these other parameters, because they are not minor. They contribute in a significant way to the perception of an environment. And turning that into an opportunity, rather than seeing a big problem in this, that's what I love to do with my team, saying, hey, take these parameters, massage these parameters to the most benefit of the climate, of the lifestyle, of the local project, and massage this set of parameters let me say, with joy to create places which are just good, which is then linking to probably this overly simplified term, what you found on our webpage, saying low energy, low tech. I probably should review what we have on our webpage. I missed the word high comfort.
That's a good thing, because low energy, low tech is really a means to an end, which is delivering high comfort. It's always been implicit, but I think you're right. The catchphrase needs to change. Let me ask you again how this idea gets operationalized, because Brock is a really good example of what you do in a hot, humid climate. So can you give me an example of low energy, low tech, high comfort in a cold climate?
Sure. There are many buildings in cold climates which use different approaches and are set up similar to the approach creating great comfort with low tech. It's very much depending on the climate and the lifestyle, what the elements and the final ingredients are. But I could probably mention an interesting project, Luma Parc des Ateliers, which is in the south of France, Mediterranean climate, in a small, beautiful city, Arles, in the south of France, where we have been working for 15 years on a collection of buildings, starting from buildings which have zero conditioning, zero heating, completely naturally ventilated, to buildings which actually represent the highest end of finest conditioning for art, like Vincent van Gogh paintings. And in this huge variety, we had a lot of, we have been blessed that we could work on this project to develop these, what you just mentioned, low technology for high comfort, and bringing this to places which have many visitors. So it's visual. People can see it. People can go there and people can perceive it. And the best thing what could happen in these buildings, that they don't talk about comfort. They just go in and go into these different environments and perceive them well and can stay focused on art.
Just to clarify, this is the project that you did with, am I right, Frank Gehry?
This is a project where one of the architects was Frank Gehry. He was forming the architects. He was behind the architecture of what is called the drum and the tower. Then there was Annabelle Seldorf from New York. She did the very context-sensitive renovation of the existing buildings, and the context of that entire project was an old place where trains have been repaired for many, many years. And it was an old train workshop area. So very, let me say, technical, very rough buildings with a forge, so where you melt iron. And they gave a huge and interesting background to develop in the context and keep these buildings and just put focus on what you need to change.
The Mediterranean climate, is that easier to design for than the tropical, hot, humid climate in delivering low energy, low tech, high comfort solutions? Which is the more challenging climate?
I'm not sure if the tropics is the more challenging climate. It's very constant. I sometimes say if you're close to the equator, you have a kind of boring climate. One day is like the next day. It's warm, it's humid. I think the most challenging climates is where you go from plus 50 degrees to minus 50 degrees. And you find these climates if you go to the north or to the south, so to the 50, 40th latitudes, where you have to deal with more environmental challenges. Like you have to deal with below zero. You have to deal with ice. You have to deal with very, very low temperatures and high sun. To give you an example, places like Winnipeg in Manitoba in the center of Canada, they receive more sun than Milano in North Italy. In particular, in the wintertime when the sun is low, they have a great amount of sun besides being very, very cold. So I would not say that the tropics is the most challenging. It is probably the area of the world subtropic and tropic, where the most projects and the most cities are built at the moment. This is the challenging thing. We should learn to design for these climates and not copy things from the northern part of that planet because we like the architecture, but we don't understand the climatic context. So in this regard, I think the challenge at the moment happens in the tropical belt around the world.
In fact, a lot of your work, especially the innovations that you're known for, happen to be in hot climates. But I think the challenge in hot climates is twofold, right? One is a psychological one. So if you look at places like, say, Indonesia or Singapore, air conditioning is now seen as a lifestyle choice, as an expectation of the kind of comfort that you want, as a matter of preference. Yeah. But at the same time, we are seeing these extremes of weather due to climate change. So, for example, a few months ago in Pakistan, the peak temperature crossed 50 degrees centigrade, which was one of the highest on record. So let's talk about the extremes first. Yeah, in a city like, say, Lahore, Pakistan, yeah, isn't air conditioning now a necessity, given what the summers look like?
I guess you're right. We should distinguish between lifestyle and health reasons to design something. In my understanding, this is two different things. Cities which have summer peaks, which really peak up for a longer time and don't cool down in the nights. So have tropical nights with temperatures which never drop below 25 degrees. Cities like this, in these cities, you need to think about how can we make more healthy conditions and create places which are more healthy for people. This is, I think, an important element of what we as a professional community of designers need to think about. How can we do that? That is not to say that we should just copy instruments we have been using in other places, like air conditioning systems, local chillers, local inefficient units to cool spaces. And in particular, if you use the word lifestyle, to condition an enormous amount of area just because I can do it. This is where I try to find a kind of line in between what people need for health and what is really required towards where do I just condition or bring systems or use energy because I can do it. I think we should distinguish here and try to find a good balance for opting for creating resilient places when it's getting too hot, which is a challenge by itself.
I'd like to pause a minute to remind listeners that you can view each project discussed here at ecogradia.com. There you'll find notes and links that will help you get more out of this episode, including information on Wolfgang Kessling, his award-winning work, and our sponsor for this season, the Holcim Foundation for Sustainable Construction. Now, interestingly, Wolfgang has been on 2 project teams that have won the Holcim Award. The Holcim Award is the world's most significant prize for sustainable construction. Wolfgang's winning projects were the Brak University campus in Dhaka, Bangladesh, mentioned earlier in this episode, and a low-carbon office tower in Sydney, Australia. Now, the 2 buildings could not be more different, not just in their response to the climate or urban context, but also the way they frame the challenge of sustainability in the developing and developed worlds. Here's where the award and its list of recipients gets interesting. There is here an evolving conversation on what sustainability means in different parts of the world, seen from different points of view. We may all want the same outcome, but how we get there can and should be different. To find out more about the upcoming cycle of the Holcim Awards, go to holcimfoundation.org. You've been very critical of codes and standards that promote this idea of universal comfort. In particular, you say that the science of comfort has been incorrectly interpreted, creating an over-reliance on air conditioning in warm climates. Can you talk us through a little bit more on the confusion that we have with comfort? I mean, you mentioned Ole Fanger, this Danish professor who did research in the 1960s, and his work. Now, how has that been misinterpreted in the way that we approach building design?
But, first of all, I would like to say I love the work of Olafanga. It was such a great fundamental work, bringing down to ground, down to earth, an energy balance, describing comfort, describing environmental parameters in the context of human comfort. What might created the misinterpretation is what it has been used for. Because as a result of that complex thing, that complex science of what is comfortable for people and the environmental parameters which create that comfort was basically reduced to very, very little parameters, basically to air temperature. Yeah? Bring a space to 23 degrees, 24 degrees, that's comfortable. Probably because it's easy to do so. Now you delegate the entire design to the mechanical systems. You delegate to a system saying, hey, just take care that the air temperature is 24 degrees, which is, I think, where the work of Olafanga is not fully used for its total benefit. And this creates such small, we say, comfort envelopes. Envelope in the meaning of what is the minimum temperature and the maximum temperature, so the temperature band. If it just swings 2 or 3 degrees and humidity swings a little bit, that's super comfortable. But that's the most boring static environment. And most people exposed to such an environment often find themselves after work just going out, jumping on the bicycle, riding, if it's raining or not, outside, just because they want to feel something. They want the senses activated of the human body. But
the flip side of it is that we also get so acclimatized to it, right? That you spend 8-9 hours in an air-conditioned space, and then when you go outside, especially if you're in a tropical, humid, hot climate, you look for the next air-conditioned space because you've gotten used to it, right?
Right, that's absolutely right. And this is linked to what scientists describe with the word adaptive. Yeah? If you are just used to this environment, you are preferring this environment, and you feel that an environment which is less controlled, but probably more exciting and more inspiring is not what you want. And the parallel world to what Olafanga did and describing very closed comfort envelopes probably is described with the world of adaptive comfort research, which is basically a complete different way on looking on people. It's not looking on the energy balance. No, it's observing people in different contexts, in different climates, in different conditions, and saying, hey, they feel comfortable. Let's look how they behave. They could change their clothing. So that's one of the very expressed ways that people feel comfortable, but they don't do. So let's figure out what is the environmental conditions. And then the world of scientists figured out, oh, the band of temperatures is way bigger when compared to what Olafanga's misinterpretation, let me use that word again, would suggest. The range of temperatures which we feel comfortable is way bigger, and turning that knowledge out of the adaptive science world into design then helps designers to say, hey, let's leave this very small comfort definition, take a broader comfort definition of the adaptive world and design buildings for this. And you see people are just enjoying themselves. And how do we know? We basically know that spaces are comfortable if you're not talking about comfort. If you're not saying, I want it warmer, I want colder, I want to change. In the absence of the desire to change something, comfort is defined. Let me quickly summarize that. It basically means you allow a broader range of these environmental parameters, but in the context they are mixed. They create comfort.
I want to take a step back in time and look at how the idea of comfort has changed, not in science, but in the way comfort is discussed in society. And so the one example I can think of is Singapore's founding prime minister, the late Lee Kuan Yew, who was quoted as saying, and I quote, air conditioning was a most important invention for us. And here he's referring to Singapore. It changed the nature of civilization by making development possible in the tropics. Without air conditioning, you can work only in the cool early morning hours or at dusk. And the first thing I did upon becoming prime minister was to install air conditioners in buildings where the civil service worked. This was key to public efficiency. Now, Singapore is, of course, a city-state that's near the equator, and here the weather is mostly humid and hot. Now, Prime Minister Lee was referring to an earlier stage in Singapore's development when productivity of the workforce was really critical. But he makes two implicit arguments here, that climate of the tropics is uncomfortable enough to impede productivity, and that air conditioning was the best way to deal with thermal discomfort. What is your view of that?
Probably it sounds ridiculous to you, but I think he was right. And in his way, he wanted to say we need a better comfort, more comfortable spaces, and then people probably react to this better comfort and they feel better. It's more healthy. But the way to say that in the early 80s, 90s, 80s, when he introduced air conditioning, Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, the way to do that was just air conditioning, use of air conditioning. The science and the idea that air conditioning is just one element which creates comfort was not developed. So at that time, his saying was, we want comfort, but it was synonymous with we want air conditioning. And I guess one of the interesting buildings, School of Design number 4 in the National University in Singapore, shows how comfort could be created in that place with the same focus, but doing it completely different.
This is the SDE4 building at the National University of Singapore. This is an interesting project because it's a net zero energy building. So let's talk about that. Yeah, it's a mid-sized building, about 6 stories high, with teaching and research spaces. Now, the zero energy target is, of course, achieved because it has solar PV on the roof that matches the energy demand of the building. To reduce demand, SDE4 has all the right moves. It has passive features and strategies, shading, daylighting, and so on. But you proposed an innovative hybrid cooling system. And this is the thing I want to talk about. And the hybrid cooling system takes the idea of comfort forward. It brings the adaptive theory of comfort into practice, and it actively reduces the building's energy demand. Now, tell me about the hybrid cooling system of SDE4. How does that work?
The hybrid system, in my understanding, is as you say, the most interesting part. The sexiness of net zero is what brings this project very often into the news, because people think, how sexy is this? It's a net zero energy building, can produce all its energy by itself. But this is a statement, or this is a quality of a building which is not interesting unless the building creates comfort. So comfort basically is what matters for me, for my team the most. And when we've been invited to work on that team, developing that idea, how to create a net zero building, we defocused from energy to the people, and we focused on how to create comfortable spaces. And in this context, Transsolar is just a team player. We have just been one part of the team, of the client, of the university, of the faculty, which expressed that wish of the building, the MEP engineers, the architects, and we have been part of that team to figure out if we want to go to that net zero idea, we need to challenge how do we create comfort. And that initiated a very fruitful discussion across that team. It was a fruitful discussion with all the different stakeholders to create comfortable spaces by taking influence on the architecture, by matching the academic program which need to fit into this building, by creating places which passively work well, and to and to take this as a holistic approach to design a space which are now known under hybrid temperate systems to create adaptive comfort. So what is that? What we learned in doing and working on this is In simple terms, we could raise the temperature in the spaces and counter battle that higher air temperatures and higher air humidities in the space with a gentle breeze. And doing that creates excellent, comfortable spaces. So basically, in a very nutshell, reduced saying, we have designed it for higher temperatures and compensate this with elevated airspeed, gentle breeze. This leads to a design which has a lot of advantages in the context of this, how the building is performing and working.
Could you be a bit more explicit? So when you say higher temperatures, what set points are we talking about? And when you say higher humidity, what levels are we talking about? And when you say gentle breeze, what is that in numerical terms?
Let me start different here. Before I talk about numbers, let me put that in a context. The building needs to be comfortable. The building we are in needs to be comfortable, but we also need fresh air. And that's a key element of energy use and it's driving technology typically, but it's a key element also to create comfort. Air quality or indoor air quality measured in terms of carbon content of that air, which is measured in ppm, should always be as low that my mind is as fresh as possible. It should be below 1,000. If it's 800 parts per million, it's a great environment. My brain stays fresh. My brain stays crisp. How is that linked to comfort? We figured out that if the building is passively well designed, well shaded by these overhangs, what you just mentioned, the east and west protection, if we figured out if we supply a good deal of fresh air to the spaces to keep the people fresh by good air quality, and we temper this air, we don't over chill this air, we just bring 20 degrees to the space, dew point of 20 degrees, we bring a high amount of fresh air into the space of this quality. The space itself, this is fully sufficient to control temperature in that space. That space swings between 26, 27, in the peak 29 degrees, and perceived with a gentle breeze of air, which is, let me say, in technical terms, 0.7 meters, 1 meter per second. Perceived in this context, the space is quite well and quite comfortable. So if you're afraid of 1 meter per second, what is that? If you walk with 1 meter per second. So that's the breeze, what you feel at your hands. If you walk in a decent way, that is a breeze. So it doesn't look like a hurricane. Nothing is flying around. Papers are not flying away from the tables. It's just a gentle breeze.
This breeze is activated by a grid of ceiling fans. So what you're describing then is that the space is fed with moderately cooled air, and that moderately cooled air is combined with ceiling fans to arrive at a perceived temperature, which is much lower than the air temperature. Is that a good way of describing it?
That's a good way to describe it, and I can just share a basic knowledge here. If you have a gentle breeze by the fans, what you just described, which is spread around the building, it's probably 3 degrees in air temperature, what the perception drops. So what is 29 is perceived as 26. What is 27 is perceived at 24, which is a very much underestimated quality in creating a space. But to what end and to what other benefit would that lead if we can let rise the temperature in the space? If it's getting close to 28, 29, that's outside temperature in Singapore. So we can open the windows. And this was a perfect match in the School of Design. And we see it, the students, the people using that spaces, they can open the windows. They can have natural breeze whenever they like to. And this is working perfectly without creating any mold issues, because we don't overly chill the building down when it's in operation. We just keep it at temperatures and humidity which are decent.
So to clarify, there are times of the day when the cooling system is switched off and the occupants can then open the windows and get a good cross ventilation. And the contrast between the cooled period and the open window period is not so dramatic. It's not such a big gap. It actually doesn't feel like such a big transition. And therefore, it encourages people to utilize favorable outdoor conditions, right? When the temperature outside is good, they actually can open the windows and it feels not so different. It feels actually quite comfortable. I want to go back to the point that you made about fresh air, because that's the mystery here. Why is there 100% fresh air? Most air conditioning systems have a return air system. So a conventional air conditioning system will pump cold air in and then it will take it back and then it will mix it with a little bit of fresh air and pump it back in again. How is this system different? Why does it have 100% fresh air?
What you describe is a very conventional approach where we are used and we think it's just the way how things need to be, where fresh air is brought into the space and there's a huge airflow going around, which is called in technical terms a return airflow, which is used to cool the space. So to our surprise and surprise of the MEP and the entire team, we figured out if we go to this hybrid design, which is super appropriate for the tropics, this return air is not necessary, and there is no efficiency in a heat recovery. There is nothing. A heat recovery turned out with all what we did analyze to be less efficient than not to have it. So then we decided if heat recovery does not help us to make efficiency high in the system, hey, let's get the return air system. Let's get all the second part of the system, second part meaning once I have the air in the space, how do I get it out? Let's get all this system out. Let the air which we have conditioned to the space as temporary air, just let it spill over to the adjacent balconies, to the people sitting and waiting and talking in front of the spaces which are conditioned with the temperate air system. So it was in a surprising way, and I was not expecting that at the beginning, but it's typical for what we do. We have been looking on the analysis of the systems. In a surprising way, it turned out, hey, just get the investment for the return air system for heat recovery. Just get it out. It doesn't help.
So air is pumped into a space. This moderately cooled air is pumped in, but it is not returned back into the system. It's allowed to basically leak into secondary spaces around the airtight spaces. And that allows you then to increase your fresh air intake, but it also means that you have lower capital costs because you've eliminated half the cost of an air conditioning system. I don't know if it's half, but definitely a significant percentage, which is the entire return air system is gone. You basically have what is called a single pass system. So it's air being pumped into a space and then it's allowed to leak out. And this, surprisingly, is more energy efficient and it's healthier. And this was a surprise to you?
It was a surprise to us. And I remember when we have been going through that process, I said, hey, let's take a Swiss system, the best you can buy, the best heat recovery you can get, the best ducting, and technically not only heat recovery, recovery of humidity. And it turned out it wouldn't do anything better. Energy, just to pump air around, besides the cost, would be higher than the recovered thermal energy. That was surprising, but now today we understand that. Today we use this knowledge. Today we have more projects where we implement this type of hybrid temperate air supply, and we know how to look on and evaluate heat recovery. It has benefits. It's less operational energy. It is way less ducting. It is way less technology and investment cost. So today it's a less of surprise, and we learned that this kind of idea is quite useful across tropics and subtropical places and climates.
How do you get perceived? I mean, do people mistake you for engineer, or how does the conversation go? Do they know that you come from a physics background?
I usually introduce myself as a scientist, saying I'm a trained scientist, I'm a climate engineering, I'm not an MEP engineer, I'm not a structural engineer, I'm not an architect, don't let me draw anything. So I'm pretty clear in what I can bring to the table. And I think it makes sense. So people immediately know what to expect and what not to expect. The journey behind that was nothing which was planned. It was a little bit based on on the background in doing solar research. And here's probably the answer to your question. When we've been doing solar research, I was for 9 years doing a solar air conditioning system and storage system for solar air conditioning. And basically that is my link to the tropics and to hot, warm and humid climates. What I learned when people came to us from Saudi Arabia, from other places, from Japan, and wanted to do projects with us, they came through the technology they wanted to get from us, the support and technology. What we learned is if you just go with the ordinary building, your roof will not be big enough for the solar system to make the solar air conditioning. So what basically we learned is focus on people and buildings. And I'm speaking more or less for the background of all of my partners at Transsolar. So that explains a little bit the journey. We came from solar. We figured out you cannot just replace fossils with solar. You need to make the buildings and the projects better. So by this, we learned, and that is the founding idea of Transsolar, let's focus on the building and the people first. And that was the path we went through. And that's probably, at least in my feeling, a very powerful path, because I learned where to look first and where to put the finger and what needs to be done. And what I also learned is I don't believe that technology will fix the problems of that planet. That's a very strong intrinsic learning by that path. It was not planned. It just happened.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much of it was by design and how much of it luck. I mean, what's the percentage there?
It was a lot of luck. I can give you an example. The first project I made with Frank Gehry, Los Angeles-based architect, there was a call to Transsolar. There is an architect who wants to meet somebody in Frankfurt for the competition on the European headquarter. Nobody raised the arm, so I said, "Yeah, I drive to Frankfurt. Let me see who I'm going to meet."
So, what did you think when you first met Frank Gehry?
In Frankfurt, I met his team, but since then, I had a very good working relationship. And I think what makes sense for me is to be honest. So you can be whatever architect and designer of the world, but if the design is not working hand in hand with quality and creating something, if your design is challenging physics, if the design is challenging gravity, which is more the problem of the structural engineers, why shouldn't we just say it? Hey, this is not a smart thing. Probably it looks good, but it's not a smart thing. And this kind of very open dialogue I have with all of my architects, and I'm not holding back because I'm afraid of a big respected person. I'm just saying, look, I think it doesn't work. I just let you know. I would do it different. Yeah. And what I learned is how the responsiveness of architects hearing that is great. Yeah. And that includes Frank Gehry, that includes many, I don't want to drop names here. It includes many people, and many architects saying, okay, let's listen to this person. Let's listen. If he's probably the only one at the moment saying, be a little bit careful. I try to put it in nice words, but I try to be honest. And then they start listening. And that basically, I learned, creates better buildings, because then if the collective quality of these minds is used to solve a problem, not to create a problem, you can imagine what happens.
You've been not only a great practitioner, but you've also been a great teacher. I mean, you've come to Singapore to teach in my program at the National University of Singapore. I wonder what you would say to a young person who wants to make their mark in the world in the same way that you have. What should they do? I mean, how do you even begin to define success?
My best answer would be stick to your talents. See where you are talented. In this field, you are good. And if you and find out where you're good and stay with your beliefs. And I think that is sometimes looking that it brings you to streets which are narrow or have a dead end, but sticking to talents and your beliefs at the end develops a super confident and power in what you do, and could become a leading idea in developing one's career. And don't be afraid of changes. Don't be afraid if changes come along. We need to kill our darlings sometimes. We need to be open that sometimes what we have been thinking gets a different understanding when we learn more about the world and we understand it in a different context. So don't be afraid of changing. Sounds so easy.
Yeah, I think it is.
It's a tricky one.
How do we navigate the world? It's so complex today. There's just so much information coming at us. How do you filter out the noise?
Not everything what is new is good. Not everything what is just popping up on my screen and is shooting over to me through social media means that it's good because it's new. So I'm a little bit a conservative person. I'm a little bit saying, okay, let's have a second look here. And I protect myself basically against too much noise. I don't have all the social media channels open all day long, and I'm a little bit protecting. But there are, and as a physicist, that's easier to understand. There are basic rules which hold, and they define a corridor in what we can do. And this reality check in this often is helpful before I follow a strange dream. So getting back to the basics sometimes is a very useful method, technique to not be overrun by the next new idea, which is unchecked, which is doesn't have the reality check before. So a kind of mixed answer, but this is the corridor in which I try to navigate.
Well, what does going back to the basics mean? I mean, are there touchstones or books or references or people that you go back to? I'm just wondering how you hold on to that sense of reality.
I guess your question has different answers when I look into different episodes in my life. And starting with the first episode when I was at the university in Munich and had the blessing to work at Professor Sitzmann's place. He founded a chair for solar energy studies at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. So we did a hell of basic research, and that's what we learned. We learned, look on the basics. What is the physics of radiation? What is the physics of a spectrum? What is, and so on. You can imagine. So we learned to be critical with what we see and ask the questions, do I understand what I see? That's typical for physicists, but that helped me all across my professional career to balance out and to figure out, is that a quick answer which looks sexy, or is that an answer which really works? So I had the blessing of learning that, and that includes my colleagues many colleagues of the older generation in my Munich office.
And later in life, you said that was an earlier phase, but at the later phase now, for example?
At the moment, I do it very different. I'm very inspired by young students. And again, that's a blessing. They come to our place and they make a master thesis with us, or they just bring in tools from outside where I see, wow, I had this idea. I wanted since ever develop this, but he has the means to do so. And here's the link. Now I'm more in the situation that I say, since long, I would like to have a tool to, for instance, to predict air movement in spaces. So how can we program that? And I find people around me saying, look, I programmed something like this. I have no idea what to do with this. And here clicks, and here's the link where I say, hey, I have an idea for you, and let's do this. So at that part in my life, I follow up with some of these ideas through the talents of people who love to come to Transsolar to get into this probably crazy world, which is very unstructured because the type of project, the typology of problems is so diverse. But they bring something to us, and they bring questions. Some of the questions we had 30 years ago, and but they are fruitful. They bring this kind of information, and in this context, in this interchange, at the moment, I learn a lot, and we bring this to projects. That makes this kind of inflowing in energy information makes it quite often into projects.
Last question. So apart from the things that you try to do through Transsolar, through your work, what do you think needs to happen to get us to the world that you imagine?
I guess I think it's quite important that we understand our role in terms of, am I just optimizing my profit, or do I contribute to something? And having just said this, it is quite difficult to imagine a process which creates a better world. I think we need to be super honest, and there are no easy fix and easy answers, and we cannot delegate and wait that somebody else is solving something for us. That's not what makes this world a better place. We need to be part of that. What that means for each person is totally different, obviously, but we need to be part of that without waiting for others. The world is so diverse. I guess that there's so many societies, so many cultures, so many cultural backgrounds, local lifestyles. The world is so diverse that it's even hard to imagine that we find one answer here. It's just I cannot imagine that.
But what gives you hope then for the future?
There's an incredible power and joy coming back if you have projects made which are anchored around your beliefs, and you see that others join that, and others are happy with what they could contribute, and the entire team is happy with the success. So I think this power is something I'm always interested in, and I have learned, and I see that this is a kind of rewarding energy which comes back at a very, very late stage, but it is totally worth to fight for that and to go through deep and a little bit rough waters in the projects, because none of the projects which made it on our webpage, and you probably have seen, and the project, including the projects we both have been working on, they have never been straight. It has been always a struggle and a team effort, but the energy comes back at the end, which is a multitude of energy what you put in. That's great. That gives me a lot of fun. If this is already hope, I'm not sure.
So what you put in is what you get out. Well, that's a kind of hope, I would think so. On this optimistic note, thank you, Wolfgang. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me. And as always, thank you to our listeners for joining us. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, subscribe to EcoGradia on any directory or listening app where you find your podcasts. You can also find all our episodes and related notes at ecogradia.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media and recommend us to friends and colleagues. And please remember, check out our sponsor, the Holcim Foundation for Sustainable Construction. Find out more about the good work that they do at holcimfoundation.org, and look out for the announcement and details of the upcoming 7th cycle of the Holcim Awards, which is literally around the corner. And finally, a big shout out to the team who worked hard to put this episode together. EcoGradia's producer, Maxim Flores, editorial assistants, Anne Matthews and Amulia Duripala, our sound engineer and editor, Kelvin Brown at Phlogiston. Thank you, guys. Until we meet next, this is Nirmal Krishnani signing off in Singapore.